The Honorable High-Silvitz presiding. Honorable is quick. May be seated.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the members of the jury. Thank you for you guys all here in the audience. Proceedings will follow like this. Mr. Overhog up there will be asking questions of Trogdor LLC and their plans to send out a proposal to expand in Brazil. Trogdor representatives will give clear and concise answers to Mr. Overhog and the jury and the audience that's in attendance. After all information has been given, representatives of Trogdor, Mr. Overhog will recap what was covered. At that time, members of the jury, which are the instructors there, will have a short window to ask questions, get more clarification. During the proceedings, I ask for clarification or direct parties to speak up. So, if anything, I will make sure that they talk louder so that way you can hear what's going on. If there's any objections, I will either sustain and allow it, or I will refuse those objections and overrule and let it be written into the records. Respect will be given to the jury. Respect will be given to the Trogdor members. Respect will be given to the judge. And make sure you turn off all your cell phones. So that way you do not need to have that. Please stay silent and see what's going on there. If I have to, I will hold you in contempt of court. You will be sentenced for incarceration for 30 days. Listen to Mr. Harsh talk the entire time. Mr. Overhog, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, members of the jury, it is Trogdor LLC's wish to expand into your beautiful country, and today we will demonstrate that our design is intended to make things run smoothly and efficiently at the new Cider Corporation. We shall show, with our experts, a design and eventual build of the infrastructure that is based on sound, tested experience. I'd first like to bring up Mr. Swatzel to the stand to talk about the drive and passion of Trogdor LLC.
Thank you very much, Counsel. It's great to be here today.
Of course. Would you please state for the jury your name?
Chris Swatzel.
Excellent. Now, would you please explain a little of the ideals behind Trogdor LLC?
Absolutely. Here at Trogdor LLC, we provide technology services and solutions to enterprise business environments. We uphold the highest standards of consulting and administration practices. We provide custom and personal infrastructure experiences to suit the needs of our clients. We do this by utilizing the most current and up-to-date technologies in order to stay ahead of the competition.
And what exactly are we bringing before this jury today?
Well, our proposal is for the expansion of our services to South America within the next 6 months. We will be applying strict adherence to the international regulations set forth by South America and Brazil. Trogdor LLC intends to create jobs for the local population and give back to the community in any way that we can. Our presence alone will also increase IT standards across the board.
Let's see. And why should this court find in favor of Trogdor LLC as opposed to its competition?
Well, that's a great question, Counselor, which leads me to these gentlemen sitting next to me and over here today. Here at Trogdor LLC, we strive to be the best, and these men are the brightest, most up-and-coming IT professionals I've ever had the chance to work with. Each one of them thrives on bringing unprecedented results naturally in networking and technology environments. Or, frankly, as we like to put here at Trogdor, we burnate the competition. This leads us to our proposed build today. As you can see right here, we have our structure in place. Our Trogdor local branch in Kansas City, Missouri is our corporate offices, as well as our Texas branch, which oversees much of the southwest region of the United States. And now our new proposed Cider.local location, which my experts will be leading for you here today. So I'd like to turn it over to them and let you give the details.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swatzel. I'd like to bring Mr. Lung to the stand. If you wouldn't mind, please state your name and your role for the jury.
Timothy Lung, and I'm in charge of the trust and support structure.
Excellent. Would you please explain to them the overall design and kind of the setup of your structure?
Well, currently, Trogdor LLC has a single force with a single child domain. The parent-child relationship is an implicit two-way transitive trust. With our expansion into South America, from our Texas location, We are creating a brand new forest with a completely separate domain. Though it's a new forest, we are setting up two one-way external trusts, which are non-transitive. This means it does not inherit anything up or down to any other domain other than the specific domain to which it is applied.
Now, why would you set up multiple forests and not just, say, a single parent-child relationship or even just a single domain infrastructure?
Well, Counselor, the reasoning behind this is because Texas.Trogdor needs full access to CytoCorp's corporate office in order to ensure that the bill maintain Trogdor LLC's strict and perfect standards. The idea is to get Cider.local up and running and allow them to add children as we expand deeper into South America. If we just extended our own domain to them as a child instead of a forest, it would add cross-continental clutter and extensive workloads to the administrator at Trogdor LLC's corporate office. With our plan, Trogdor LLC's corporate office is completely hands-off, allowing us to expand at our own pace in North America. All communications from CytoCorp to Trogdor LLC will be through our Texas channel.
And how would you assure that you had enough IP addresses to hand out?
Well, we're using a 172.16 private range, /23 with a subnet mask of 255.255.254.0. This gives us 510 usable IPs within each of a possible 128 networks. It gives us plenty of room for expansion. We don't foresee going over 100 locations anytime.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You may sit down, Mr. Lund. I'd now like to ask Mr. Leckby to come to the stand. Would you please state your name and your jury?
My name is Joseph Leckby.
What is your role?
Over at DNS and WINS.
Okay, so please explain DNS and WINS and how it's used in your industry.
DNS and WINS are both forms of name resolution. Computers use numbers to communicate and speak and to be identified. However, it's a little easier for us to identify names to kind of keep track of what devices we're working with. The DNS works as a phone book to keep an organization of those names linked to those numbers that they actually are. WINS is a different form of name resolution that works with NetBIOS. It's somewhat of a legacy technology, but it does have its uses, and that's why we decided that we would include it.
I see. Would you please expand a little bit more on the processes and settings that you have for Cider Corporation?
Sure. Every domain would have an Active Directory integrated forward lookup zone, as well as a reverse lookup zone. The Cider would have a secondary zone from Texas, as well as a conditional forwarder to Texas. The secondary zone returns an authoritative answer, and it also contains a copy of records from the zone that it points to. The conditional forwarder is a recursive query, which returns a non-authoritative answer. We would also have set up zone transfers to be able to transfer all the records from the primary zone that the secondary zone is assisting.
Now, you spoke a lot about forward lookup zones. Why did you implement a reverse lookup zone?
Well, forward lookup zones are able to resolve a name to an actual IP address. We have the need to resolve an IP address back to a name, and that's where a reverse lookup zone will come.
Thank you very much. Have a seat, Mr. Leckby. Now I'd like to bring Mr. Stickler to the stand. Please state your name and your role in this presentation.
Andrew Stickler, I was in charge of implementing Active Directory.
So why would you set up an Active Directory structure as opposed to, say, work groups?
Well, a work group really is just a basic grouping of computers with no central security database, intended to help users just to find objects like printers and shared folders in a small location. Works for smaller companies, about 25 users or less. Outside of that, it becomes a little difficult to manage users and machines. So therefore, in a 200-person cube farm like we have planned in South America, moving to a domain in Active Directory is much more organized. And in a domain, passwords and permissions are simpler to keep track of because the domain provides centralized administration and security. And then the information within the database is replicated automatically among the two domain controllers in each location.
And what exactly is a domain?
Well, a domain simply is a collection of objects, users, groups, OUs, that share the same database in Active Directory. It provides a security boundary for users accessing resources by using authentication and authorization. This gives members of the domain a specific place to locate and access resources on the network.
Thank you. Would you please expand a little more about OUs and groups?
An organizational unit, or OU, organizes locations, departments, and objects, and are used to assign group policy settings or delegated administrative authority. A group is a collection of user and computer accounts that provides ease of administration for permission of rights to multiple users all at once, instead of having to do it one at a time.
And how did you distinguish different objects within your Active Directory?
We will be carrying over our naming convention from our original domains for security reasons, rather than naming machines DC1 or DC2 for our domain controllers. For example, machines were given a 2-digit designation followed by a random 4-digit number. User accounts begin with a prefix consisting of the first letter of the user's first name and the first letter of the user's last name, followed by the random 4-digit number, leaving plenty of room for future expansion. Then our OUs will be set up according to departments, such as sales, marketing, human resources, etc. Groups will then be created in the OUs with a separate user group and manager group in each OU.
Thank you very much. I'd like to next call Mr. Reichel to the stand. Would you please state your name for the record and kind of your role?
My name is Zach Reichel, and I was in charge of scripting automation to meet our 6/20 deadline to get cider.
Thank you. Now, I understand you have a piece of evidence to show the jury that would kind of shed a little light on the behind-the-scenes aspects of the build. Would you please, kind of in layman's terms, expand on that?
Yes. What we have here is a script that will be adding in all of the OUs, user accounts, and groups, and inserting the groups within the OUs and the users within the groups and nesting them according to their proper
access their home folder. The also key part of this is what allows us to set up multiple users simultaneously is the fact that we are using %username to accomplish a task.
Now, with these new folders I see we're about to show here, there we go. Are users able to just put as much as they can into each one of those folders?
You know, ultimately, I think that would be fabulous for everyone. Unfortunately, within our environment, that just isn't feasible. We have set up home folder quotas, not only on the folders themselves, we've also set up volume quotas based on users. So their job role, for example, as you can see, standard users have 2 gigabytes of storage space, management has 10 gigabytes of storage space. It allows us to kind of control and monitor the data.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Now that we have access to data, let's bring up Mr. Rupert, kind of talking about the backing up. Mr. Rupert, if you would mind, give your name for the jury.
Lance Rupert, I was in charge of backup and shell company.
Thank you. And would you mind just explaining a little bit about your schedule and how you implemented your backing up?
Absolutely. First of all, for our storage, we are using a RAID 5 array. It is used for fault tolerance, and it uses disk striping with parity. It is also the most common, so that's why we went with that. We're also using a RAID 1 array. It is used for all of our operating systems. As far as backup, on Server 2012, you are able to do a full server backup, as far as, and you can also back up specific volumes, files, and folders as well. You can also do a complete bare metal backup. You can also recover specific files, folders. We will also be utilizing backup on a weekly full backup Saturday evening at 10 p.m. and also daily at 10 p.m.
Thank you. I noticed it says shadow copies. Can you explain to the jury what those are, kind of how you implemented them into your system?
Absolutely. Shadow copies restore previous versions of the files and folders. It's much faster to use than the traditional backup. It's much easier to restore any data. Think of it kind of like a restore point so that you don't have to go back to your complete backup. What it does is that it takes a snapshot of the specific file or folder, so you can go to that shadow copy folder and retrieve your data that way. We will be using incremental shadow copies daily from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every 2 hours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rupert. You can have a seat now. I'd like to bring up Mr. Jacob to the stand. If you wouldn't mind, please state your name and kind of your role.
My name is Dan Jacob, and I will be responsible for the group policy objects.
Thank you. Now, how do you basically give control, or how do you set up control for what your users have access?
Well, group policy objects are a mechanism to establish rules and settings and then push them out across your network to individual objects. We could have done a local group policy objects, but those are done directly on each computer, and obviously in a 200-person cube farm, it'd be a lot of time spent out there at each individual device.
Thank you. Now, exactly what group policies did you activate and why?
As you see up here on the screen, we activated a few group policies. We did this for security and cohesion across the network. The current one up on the screen is our password policy. Now, we did create 3 different password policies, but GPOs, you can only create actually one. So we did have to go into the ADSI, which is the Active Directory Services interface, and actually create 2 other passwords with more complexity for our management and administration. This password policy up here, as you see, lets us establish the history remembered, how long the password is able to be in effect, minimum number of characters, the complexity, and then goes into the lockout settings. We also created a control panel GPO. This blocked or denied the users the ability to use anything in the control panel to keep them from breaking the computers. This did, however, block the users from creating a VPN and DAP. Set it at the domain level, pick the groups that you don't want to apply to, go down to your apply group policy and deny them the ability to activate the GPO.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Mr. Jacobs. Jacob, you can have a seat. All right, I'd like to bring Mr. Scoville to the stand. If you would please state your name for the record and your role, please.
My name is Sean Scoville. I'm in charge of implementing the DHCP.
Okay. Can you explain how, can you just explain a little bit more about DHCP and how you would assign addresses for your clients?
Yeah, DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. It is a role that dynamically assigns IP addresses. Along with it uses a scope or range that allows us to access our usable IP addresses. Along with the IP address, it also allows us to set scope options to give out to the clients. Along with these scope options, some of those include the default gateway, the DNS server and suffix. Also, it allows us to set a Win server plus the node types with a few others. Along with all these options in our setup, we also wanted to add some exclusions. We excluded the first 50 addresses for our servers, printers, and other devices that we may come into contact with. We excluded the last 54 addresses to be solely used by VPN and router uses.
I see. So what would happen if your primary DHCP server would go down? Do you have any fault tolerance set up in the system?
Our company would like to set up a secondary DHCP server for fault tolerance. We would create an exclusion within our primary DHCP server to be usable by the secondary DHCP server with a few milliseconds delay as to not conflict with the primary.
Thank you. Now, my last question for you, Mr. Scoville, is how exactly does the DHCP, what is the process for handing out IP addresses?
We use DORA. DORA stands for, it's a 4-step process. It stands for discovery, offer, request, and acknowledgement.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Scoville. Finally, I'd like to bring up Mr. Grass and Mr. Dunn to the stand. Gentlemen, if you would mind, please state your name for the record.
Thomas Grass.
They're done.
Excellent. Now, how exactly does your company work on routing and remote access?
We will ensure network connectivity by enabling the capabilities of an operating system to function as a network router. We also set up a remote access service known as RAS. As you can see here, EPP is known as point-to-point protocol. It's a standard framing authentication protocol that enables remote access. Further, we use VPN, which is a virtual private network. We use LTTP and IPsec to data transfer between private networks.
Excellent. Now, how do you go about routing information from one network to another?
We would set up static routing tables between routers on our network.
Excellent, thank you. Now, explain to me exactly what is a firewall and how does it work?
Firewall is a security function that filters traffic which comes in and out of our network. In simple terms, like AT from your home, without your network, firewall. For example, closing off certain ports we aren't using and leaving the ports we are using open, such as port 110, port 25 for SFTP, and port 80 for HTTP. Firewall is a necessity to protect our network. No presence of a firewall making your network more vulnerable to malicious threats such as viruses, coding.
So how exactly does the firewall protect your network?
Oh yeah, there's thousands of ports we have, specifically 65,535. Ports are used to service us on the network. We don't use every single port on the firewall to protect the network from the ports we aren't using. We also block specific ports for sites, like we will on our network for the port of 1755, the site of XM radio. We can do this by creating new rules in the advanced settings of the firewall. The service of the firewall will also be blocking unused IP addresses. When the time comes in the future when those IP addresses are needed, we will then unblock them to utilize them at that time.
All right. So how would you safeguard, say, something like remote desktop protocol?
Oh yeah, remote desktop protocol is protected within the new rule, created within a specific port. Establishing this exact port, for example, 40,000 instead of the default 3389. You also have to change the port number in the registry edit. With the path being an HP local machine, system, control set, control terminal service, win station, and RDP. It's just another example of building layers of security to protect our network by utilizing RDP.
Now, Mr. Krause spoke about IPsec. What exactly is IPsec?
IPsec, Internet Protocol Security. IPsec is used on our network for packet delivery security for remote. It's going to be for remote clients to have secure connection. For example, as Tommy explained earlier, for VPN, connection deals with data security between two networks. LTTP, layer 2 tunnel protocol, for IPsec over an unprotected network such as the internet. There are two types of encryption modes, tunnel and transport modes. It supports network level pre-authentication and data origin authentication. IPsec prevents data theft, data corruption, and user credential theft. IPsec can be configured within routing and remote access on the server side.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much. You can have a seat. So, in closing today, we would like to say that we demonstrated that Trogdor LLC will set up the domain structure as adequately and expertly as possible. We heard from Mr. Swatzel about the passion and drive of Trogdor LLC. We learned from Mr. Lung the overall structure of the design as well as the IP scheme. Mr. Leckby spoke about DNS and WINS and how the system will resolve names. Mr. Stickler walked us through the Active Directory and its benefits in the domain structure as well as the OU structure. Mr. Reichel showed us that amazing script on there. Mr. Fisher and Mr. Fletcher clued us into the file services and how DFS is a great tool to prevent loss of access to files. Mr. Rupert touched on truly backing up our data in case of incident. Mr. Jacob talked about group policies and how they function. Got a little bit of detail of DHCP with Mr. Scoville. Mr. Grass filled us in on the remote and virtual sides of things, and it was brought home by Mr. Dunn with protection and firewall. So we hope this has shed a little bit of light on the hard work and excellence that would go into the building of the desired domain structure. We'd like to take a short recess so you guys can deliberate and hopefully come to a fair and just conclusion. We appreciate your consideration for today.